This episode of New Politics was released on the 2nd of May, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
Hello to our audience and hello to you, David. And in the words of Ned Kelly, so it has come to this. It's the last day of the election campaign and it's almost all over.
It was meant to be a long campaign. It hasn't, for me anyway, it hasn't felt terribly long. Oh my gosh, I have to vote by Saturday, otherwise I'll get a $50 fine and my voice won't be heard in the makeup of Parliament. For all the comedians joking about how sick they were of the campaign before it even started, at least for me, it's gone fairly quickly. It hasn't been the most inspiring of campaigns, but as I think we looked at last week, it has been an interesting election campaign. And I think, too, we're heading to some interesting times in Australian politics.
And we've also decided to release this ultimate episode on the Friday, just so you've got an extra day to listen to our wonderful dulcet tones. And it might have been the last week of the campaign, but we've still got lots of things to talk about. The final debate, welcome to country and neo-Nazis, the price of eggs, the hate media, final opinion polls, and finally what everyone wants to hear from us, our final verdict on who we think will win the election. So, David, we are a part of the hate media, but there's still lots to talk about coming from this world of the hate media.
And I can't wait.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is.
We've just finished up with the final week of the election campaign and it just felt like both sides were going through the motions of this final week. And of course, behind the scenes, there's still a lot of activity going on with pre-polling continuing into the second week and then on election day, of course. And it just feels like there's not much more that all the candidates can do except harass people at the polling booths. And the week started off with yet another leaders debate, and for the first time in an election campaign, we had a fourth leaders debate. And this one was known as the Final Showdown and broadcast on Channel 7. But to me, it just seemed pretty obvious that the Prime Minister has decided that the more people see of Peter Dutton, the more they dislike him. And he threw open the challenge to Peter Dutton for another debate. And because Peter Dutton is just so far behind in this campaign, he just had to accept every opportunity. So he really had no choice but to say yes. And we've already discussed the value of all of these leaders' debates, that there's not too much to them, and not falling over usually ends up being the pass mark. But this one was even more comprehensive for Anthony Albanese. The studio audience nominated Albanese as the winner at 50% and 25% for Dutton, and with 25% undecided. And it's hard to know whether these undecided people are genuinely undecided between the two leaders or will definitely be voting for independence. But whatever the case is, that's still a lot of people. But in a week where everything just had to go right for Peter Dutton, it started off poorly and then continued for the rest of the week. Now, it was all generally definitely better than his first 2 weeks of the campaign, but unfortunately for him, the entire campaign started off poorly, and that has just set the agenda for the rest of the 5-week period.
If you can't get that momentum in the first week, it's very hard to grab it, and you're really waiting on the other side to mess up. What would have helped Dutton would have been a major scandal with one of the Labor frontbench, for example. We said that was highly unlikely.
And we tried our best to find one.
But they are unimpeachable in terms of their personal conduct as far as we can tell. And even then, Dutton was never going to win a majority. The swing was just way too big. You might get a Kevin Rudd or a Bob Hawke do it. You might have got a Bob Menzies to swing. John Howard never worked on big swings, except for the first one. He was much happier just getting enough to govern, and that was it. And their strategy was that, because I think that's where he was most comfortable. He could be a bit more nefarious with a smaller majority. I think Dutton isn't the wildly popular walk into a room, have everyone cheering for him and genuinely love him, like a Whitlam or a Hawke or a Menzies or a Howard, really. Howard could do that, even though he only wanted half the audience. That half of the audience loved him for the most part. Dutton barely gets grudging respect and has lost a lot of it over the campaign. And we've seen that in terms of how the polls have gone, and we've seen that in how the media has responded to him. Tony Abbott could get Australia Needs Tony the day or 2 days before the 2013 election. We don't have Australia Needs Pete. It's more, well, here he is. He's probably better than the other bloke, but we don't want to blow all our credibility, so we're not going to quite endorse him. And this is partly, too, for a lackluster, incompetent campaign.
And, well, the week did start off with that leaders debate, but even if we have all of those caveats about the lack of correlation between these leaders debates and the final election result, this final debate just seemed to encapsulate and be a summary of the entire campaign. Anthony Albanese just seemed very well prepared and had all the answers. Peter Dutton seemed underprepared, and while he did offer some answers, they just didn't seem like very good answers. And we probably have that question of, well, what has everything got to do with the price of eggs? And as we found out, it's got everything to do with the price of eggs.
Here is a dozen eggs. Mr. Dutton, do you know how much they cost?
About $4.20.
No, you might get half a dozen.
Mr. Albanese?
$7 if you can find them, because it's hard to find them at the moment.
Yeah, you're looking at, I reckon you're looking at 8+. No?
Yeah, there you go. It's the Sunny Queen 12 eggs from Woolies. They're $8.80 from Coles. They're slightly cheaper at about $8.50. Yeah, that's...
And it doesn't matter if you get the unemployment rate wrong, as Anthony Albanese did in 2022, or get the inflation rate wrong, as Peter Dutton did during the week. It's all about the price of eggs. And personally, I'm not so concerned about politicians getting these figures wrong. Everyone makes mistakes. We make mistakes sometimes, David. Paul Keating got the price of a loaf of bread wrong in 1996. He lost the election. Peter Dutton gets the price of eggs wrong in 2025. He's probably going to lose this election as well. And I don't think we can expect national leaders to do the weekly grocery shop at Coles or Woolies or Aldi or IGA or wherever, but they do need to know the prices of basic supermarket items. You know, maybe they could do a bit of late night shopping in disguise so that they can find out what the hoi polloi are paying for their groceries. And not knowing the price of eggs, well, that isn't really going to win or lose the election, but it certainly didn't help Peter Dutton on this occasion.
No, and you're right. I mean, I'm not sure I could tell you how much a dozen eggs cost offhand. I go to the supermarket and I compare the prices there, and from memory, they're between $4 and $7. I think there was some...
Well, you can probably get some really cheap ones for about $4 or $5.
Yeah, I saw some organic which were $12, but I would be hard-pressed. And I'd be hard-pressed to tell you what the CPI was offhand, and even the cash rate is offhand. When I say it here, it's usually because I've looked it up and have memorised it. With the Prime Minister and with the Leader of the Opposition, they have people who will write this down for them. And that's okay. And they should be prepared. Anthony Albanese was prepared for the debate. The other thing, too, with the debate is that, you know, a debate between Paul Keating and John Howard was entertaining. They were both superb speakers in their own way, both very different public speakers, but both excellent speakers, able to sway a room, able to sway a hostile room, both loving the thrust and parry of debate. Anthony Albanese is a good public speaker. He's not a great public speaker, but he's a good one. Peter Dutton seems to be a fair public speaker. Maybe I'm being unfair to him. I've seen Anthony Albanese a few times speaking live. He was my local member till I moved out of the area. Peter Dutton doesn't come across well on television. Neither did John Howard or Bob Carr, and John Howard and Bob Carr were two of the very best speakers I ever saw. But I get the sense that Peter Dutton isn't terribly different live than he is on television. But the point is that neither of them are electrifying great speakers in the way that Keating or Howard were. The other thing too is to be Prime Minister, you don't have to be a great speaker. You can be a great Prime Minister by being a great administrator or a great people person, a numbers cruncher. But it certainly helps in a media age. Being able to communicate certainly helps.
And for most of this final week, Anthony Albanese focused on the cost of living issues and talking about what they've achieved in this term of government and of the future as well. And if the media has been pushing this whole narrative about this election being the cost of living election, well, that's what you'd expect the government and the opposition to do. And for the LNP, well, they tried to talk up the cost of living issues and they haven't really succeeded, in my opinion. So if you've got nothing else to offer, of course, you ramp up the culture wars again. And this started off during the week when the welcome to country on Anzac Day was interrupted and heckled by a group of neo-Nazis in Melbourne.
I'm a Gunditjmara man on my mother's side, and I'm a Bunurong man on my father's side. And this morning, I'm here to welcome everybody to my father's country. Beautiful Bunurong country. But before we do that, we pay our acknowledgements and we pay our respects. We pay our respects to all of my ancestors. We pay our respects to all of my elders. And we pay respects to all of my community members, past, present, and emerging. And we acknowledge the continuous and unbroken connection to country for the Bunurong people.
And just a reminder that these neo-Nazis were orchestrated by the Advance Australia group, which has been funded by the Liberal Party. And this is a break glass in case of emergency moment. When you've got nothing else to offer, well, you call in the Nazis. But I think that it's more evidence that because the Liberal Party and Peter Dutton had that great success with their negative campaign in the Voice to Parliament referendum 2 years ago, they obviously think that this will work in a general campaign. And generally, I think it's just blown up in their faces. And I just don't think that this welcome to country issue that they've been running with for the entire week can swing enough voters in the final week to change the result in the LNP's favour. And if it does somehow swing the entire election, we've just totally misunderstood the Australian electorate and we'll need to retire from political journalism and maybe start doing some cooking podcasts or self-help guides or something like that. We'll just have to give it up. But this sort of stuff really is the last refuge of the scoundrel. And this is the same thing that Scott Morrison tried to do in the 2022 election campaign. Nothing else to offer, whip up a bit of frenzy and start up a culture war on transgender people, attacking wokeness, going on about political correctness gone mad. And if anything, it's political incorrectness that's gone mad. And it's just a sign that the LNP campaign is going really, really, really badly, just as it did in 2022, if not worse this time around. And they will just have to go back to the drawing board in future elections.
If the election goes as we think it will, the first comment we will hear is, oh, we weren't right-wing enough. We pandered too much to the left. That will come from the noisier ends of the party. Of course, the voice was lost rather than won, I think, and it lost comprehensively. I don't want to say that they scraped through and they were lucky or what have you. The Yes campaign was a terrible campaign. It didn't work at all. They started off with a lot of goodwill, and that's what people forget. People were generally in favour of the voice till it worked out that their privilege was going to be threatened. They could lie about what the voice actually was, that it was this or going to be hundreds of bureaucratic offices, and having given us all this detail, then said there was no detail because they made it all up. And the Yes campaign didn't really take this on effectively, which was a failing of the Yes campaign. They were quite unable to counter the claims of it was just going to be a whole office full of Lydia Thorpes stopping every piece of legislation, and then they'll come for your house and every public school will be given to the Aboriginal community, and all these horrible lies. Labor seems to have learnt from that. They've managed to counter the lies of this election. Now, it's a shame because Penny Wong admitted on Wednesday that the voice was dead as a concept, that they would not try and revisit it at any time in the near future. which is a terrible shame, but I can see why she said that.
But the surprising thing for me was that the Liberal Party felt that all the lies and bullshit that they ran in the Voice campaign, well, that strategy could be applied to a general election campaign. And I think that's the most surprising thing for me.
Yeah, Labor seems to have learnt the right lessons, whereas the Liberal Party learnt the wrong lessons. And I said at the time too that the referendum was going to kill Peter Dutton's career, no matter how it went, so that a no vote would be just as damaging to his career as a yes vote. And it has been, because he hasn't been able to get any political capital or traction from winning. And for the number of people who realised that they voted the wrong way, there was a lot of regret after, and I think the polls after showed that had the referendum been held after the referendum, it would have got up. And Peter Dutton was seen as the main driver behind this, and now has this tinge of racism, which he'd built up all his career. And even John Howard, who was able to effectively blow a dog whistle, was never called a racist.
Well, he was a quiet racist.
Yeah, a lot of his policies were called racist. He was able to avoid the stench of it, not by his most bitter enemies, of course. But the general public didn't generally see John Howard as racist, even if the Indigenous community did, even if the Chinese community did. And they were right. And of course, the worst thing you can call a racist is racist. Nobody wants to be racist. But they want freedom of speech to be able to call whomever whatever they like.
And there was quite a bit of overkill on the campaign trail as well, and we saw the Liberal Party totally overtaking the display of the campaign with massive amounts of A-frames, call flutes and volunteers. And in the case of Kooyong in Melbourne, for the Liberal Party candidate Amelia Hamer, they virtually plastered the entire pre-poll booth with their election paraphernalia, even putting their stuff on the road until they were told to remove it by the local council because it presented a safety issue. Even still, they didn't want to remove it. And they've done this in a lot of pre-polling booths as well, and it's a tactic that they've used in my local seat, and that's in the seat of Reid. And I voted during the week, David, just to check out the vibe. And I've just never seen so many Liberal Party volunteers at a polling booth before, and so many of their call flutes. And they outnumbered everyone else by around 10 to 1, I reckon. And the thing was that they were aggressive, they were abusive, they were harassing volunteers from the other parties, they were harassing voters as well. And I spoke to a couple of them just to find out what was going on, and then they abused me as well. And I've never actually seen these people before. And I've lived in this area for some time, but I've just never seen any of these people before. And then I found out that these volunteers are not actually Liberal Party members. They are from the religious extremist group, the Exclusive Brethren, and they don't even vote because of religious reasons, yet here they are swamping the polling booth on behalf of the Liberal Party. And just because you swamp the election booth and outnumber everyone else by 10 to 1, well, that doesn't mean that you'll win. You know, more is not more. More is less. And it's actually got the opposite effect. If there's too many people from one side of politics at a polling booth, generally voters feel intimidated and threatened, and especially if you're aggressively told to vote for that particular party. And I just felt like I was going to get beaten up, David. And also there was no democracy sausage available. So for me, it was just a thoroughly bad voting experience. But the other thing that I noticed at this particular booth was that there were no images of Peter Dutton on any Liberal Party paraphernalia. And sure, there weren't that many of Anthony Albanese on the Labor side, but at least he was there. But generally, you cannot run a campaign from opposition and not promote your leader at all and then expect to win the election. And I'm sure that Peter Dutton's face would be on his campaign material in the seat of Dixon.
You hope so.
But this has got all the signs of the Liberal National Party's sandbagging their vote and saving the furniture. And there might not be too much furniture left to save anymore.
The feel is that they're trying to save seats rather than win seats. Seat of Bennelong may be won by a Liberal candidate, even though he was found to be unfit for office. But there's local issues there that may see the Liberal candidate get through on preferences, taking out the quite capable Jerome Laxale. But having said that, Jerome Laxale has been a decent local member, and that just might push him over the edge. Liberal Party was capable of winning back Kooyong till Amelia Hamer overplayed her hand. There's 1 or 2 seats, but they're likely to lose a lot of other seats that they already have, or when I say a lot, 3 or 4 other seats that they already have. So these won't be a net gain; they'll just be a win for the party. And getting Bennelong back, John Howard's seat, may give a bit of a psychological boost to them if that particular candidate can manage to hold on to the seat for the 3 years and not have to resign through some kind of scandal. I'm not saying that will happen, but it's happened before. Kooyong, I think Monique Ryan will hold. Again, I've been trying to find the 21 seats, and I know that one of the newspapers found a pathway that Dutton could win. It was paywalled, interestingly enough, so obviously they weren't that confident of it either, or they'd have given it out to everybody.
And also, we've been trying to look for positive things for the Liberal Party, because generally you and I are very positive people, but there's just not much there.
And I would much rather be the type of analyst who can say, well, on this side, there are these positives and there are these negatives. On the other side, there are these positives and these negatives. There's just not very many positives on the Liberal side, and there haven't been for years. I hope that the party will take a good hard look at itself and bring in a much more competent and less corrupt party than what we have at the moment. At the moment, it's the Greens who we can say, well, there's this that they do well and there's this that they don't do well, which is great. You know, no party is perfect. Labor has blotted its copybook with its support of Netanyahu and its support of the Zionist. And I note it's even wound back a bit. And also blotted its copybook by its treatment of Indigenous issues, particularly after The Voice, where they just threw it out, and its treatment of higher education. But nonetheless, if you ignore that, there are positives that they've done. The economy is good, etc., etc. And it's just a shame that we don't have a good opposition. And if that opposition does become government, which it can't, mathematically it can't, but if it does, we won't have very much positives to say about it because it doesn't have a lot of positives. And that's a tragedy.
But you're signing on forever.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
I use my state of the art technology, supposed to make for better living. But are we better human beings? We've got our wires on.
There's also been a distinct difference in the media styles of the main leaders in the final week. Peter Dutton has avoided most of the mainstream media. He labelled the ABC and The Guardian as the hate media in his speech to rev up the troops.
Forget about what you're being told by the ABC and The Guardian and the other hate media. Forget about that. Listen to what you're hearing on the doors. Listen to what people are saying on pre-polling. Know in your hearts that we are a better future for our country. Know that we stand up for the values that are important more than ever for families and for small businesses.
Then he went on to sook about it over at Sky News in a soft interview with Shari Markson.
You've also faced a very hostile media. It's extraordinary to watch the daily press conferences. Albanese is often given what we all call Dorothy Dixes, whereas you face hostile interrogations from the press pack. You've described The Guardian and the ABC as the hate media. Do you think that sort of media and others like them actually hate mainstream Australian values?
I just think they're so biased, and many of them just activists, not journalists, that their position becomes counterproductive, and they're playing to a particular audience, to a Green voter, and frankly, as the Prime Minister's demonstrated, his whole government has been about how do we please the inner city Green voter in Sydney and Melbourne. That's why he's taken such a soft stance in relation to anti-Semitism.
The Prime Minister has received the more hostile questions from the media, including the more ridiculous ones like this one from the journalist Latika Burke.
Now, if Peter Dutton questioned an independent expert in the way you did last night, you would be going full troppo and saying he was MAGA or Trump. So why is it okay for you to question the independence of experts? And Treasurer Jim Chalmers, if you lose Australia's AAA rating, will that disqualify you from being Australia's next Prime Minister?
Thanks, Latika. What I was doing last night was pointing out a fact that we have been responsible economic managers. And if you compare, and if you compare what our position was of 2 budget surpluses, compare that after we, under the Labor government, was what delivered the AAA credit ratings.
Well, it's talking about your future record, Ian. It's talking about the future, not yesterday's surplus.
When you finish. AAA credit ratings delivered by the Labor Party. We're very proud of that. And what we've also delivered is responsible economic management. This bloke here is the only treasurer in a long period of time who has delivered 2 budget surpluses. Right here.
And here's Peter Dutton at a media conference during the week.
You haven't, though, not in this press conference.
I've dealt with all that.
Can you deal with that now, please?
I've dealt with it before. So who's the next, next question?
Would you like to deal with it before I ask?
No, you ask. You ask.
All right, well, I'd love you to answer that, but in addition to that, regarding your candidate for Fowler...
No, we're just doing one question each, so you take your pick.
You can answer however you like.
Okay.
Regarding your candidate for Fowler, you played a game of whataboutism when you were asked about it earlier. Is it not true that if a Labor candidate had made these comments, derogatory remarks about Indigenous Australians, you would be calling for that candidate to step down or to be disendorsed?
I answered that question earlier. So the next one? I did, yeah.
Mr Dutton, aren't you being tricky with the truth not to answer today? You've had a go at Anthony Albanese for not being transparent, for lying. Aren't you being tricky with your own truth at the moment?
No.
Why won't you answer that question?
I've answered these questions before, and the red herrings and all the rest of the distractions that people want to throw out there, they're not dealing with the reality of this week. This week is about cost of living. It's about what will decide the election. And what will decide the election is whether or not Australians believe they can afford 3 more years of Labor, and I don't believe they can.
Mr Dutton, how do you expect people to vote for you if you won't answer these hard questions and you're just skipping over journalists and asking
next
them?
one.
And there's a clear difference there. Albanese answers the questions, Dutton doesn't. If he doesn't like the question, he just ignores it and goes to the next question or provides an answer to a totally different question. And these are all media strategies that politicians use. But generally, David, we identified this as a problem last year, that Peter Dutton deferring to friendly media on Sky News or 2GB and not being scrutinised by other more diligent media was just going to cause problems for him during the election campaign. And you cannot just disappear from the mainstream media during a campaign. And I think this has proved to be correct. And in contrast, Anthony Albanese addressed the National Press Club in Canberra, as did Adam Bant from the Australian Greens a few weeks ago. And if you do want to be the national leader, you do have to face the tough questions, whether they are fair or unfair questions, the stupid gotcha questions, the ridiculous ones, those questions about what's the current rate of unemployment or the price of eggs. And whether you like it or not, you just have to do this.
Yeah, it gets the swinging voters in. And this is what, and I suppose part of the saving the furniture tactic is ignoring the swinging voters and just trying to keep your base. And again, Keating, Howard, Rudd would go on hostile or potentially hostile shows and state their case. Howard copped a lot of grief for not going on Rove McManus, but there was nothing in it for him. There wasn't a vote in it for him. I understood exactly why. He did go on other shows that were probably not friendly to him, though, because they could see, well, if we can get this edge of this people, that's another seat we can win. And Howard and Keating, as I said before, loved the political sparring. They lived to fight, and both lived to fight for their parties. Howard gets stabbed in the back by his colleagues, his friends, his best friends, stab him in the back in the 80s and 90s when he's trying to be leader, and the next morning he's up selling the Liberal cause. If he'd walked away like Malcolm Turnbull did, no one would have blamed him. No one would have thought any less of him.
Maybe.
But nobody said about Malcolm Turnbull, oh, what a terrible guy. They treated him badly and he walked away. They didn't like him for other reasons, of course. That
Or gave the party $2 million, and that's the way that they treated him. Of course he'd walk
Yeah,
away.
why wouldn't you? But John Howard stayed and kept fighting. That doesn't make John Howard a good Prime Minister or someone worth following.
It shows his character more than anything else.
But it shows his character. And it shows a strange sense of integrity too.
Well, many of our listeners might not agree with that, but that's okay.
Yeah. I am not in any way, I think Howard was one of our lesser prime ministers for the damage that he did to the country. But we have to look at his strengths to understand why he was able to wreak so much damage to the country, because he was able to win votes and his actions appealed. And I think that's important to remember.
And I think a lot of this gets back to that question that we've constantly asked during this campaign. Well, who has actually devised this campaign for the Liberal Party? Where are the Liberal Party minders on all of this? And for me, it just goes back 3 years ago. You know, who decided that their leader, Peter Dutton, should just mainly appear on conservative and friendly media outlets and just talk within an echo chamber? And you've already mainly got the vote of the audience of Sky News and 2GB. As a political leader, you have to branch out and appeal to more people. And I realise that there's more to campaigning than just going onto mainstream media. It's social media, independent media, it's podcasts, the whole new world of new media. Trying to maximise your audience and talking to the people and those audiences that might not vote for you, that's what you have to do. You just have to do that, because that's how you win an election campaign. That's how you win the election. You have to keep your base voters, hold on to your supporters, but also get the people who didn't vote for you at the last election to vote for you at this election. And you can't achieve that if you're not having a conversation with those people and talking to them through every media opportunity that you've got available to you.
Yeah. You'll never win an election on your supporters alone if you're a major party. And gone are the days where it was 45% Liberal, 45% Labor, and then you were arguing over the 10%. It's now something like 30% each, and you're arguing over 40% of the people. And if you don't at least make an effort, you just can't win. It's almost as if they realise that Peter Dutton should never have been leader, and they're doing their best to get him out as quietly and as dignified as possible.
And also just picking up on that idea of the hate media, Peter Dutton just seemed to double down on his attacks on the ABC, telling his supporters not to watch the ABC on election night. And maybe he doesn't want them to hear Anthony Green telling them that they've lost yet another election. And I think that that's an insult to Anthony Green. That's his last election campaign ever. And
scrupulously fair.
And this, to me, is just a really stupid tactic. And we've called out the ABC for a long time on the quality of their political reporting over the past 5 or so years, and in a lot of cases providing support to the Liberal Party in running an anti-Labor Party narrative. And during the week, they had quite a few repeats of the Kitchen Cabinet episode featuring Peter Dutton, and they did that usual thing of cutting off announcements by Anthony Albanese after just a couple of minutes and then saying, sorry, we've got to cut away to a media conference by Peter Dutton, and then running that for the entire 20 minutes or so. So as far as I'm concerned, the ABC of today is Liberal Party Central or Sky News Lite. They've got a lot of ex-News Corporation people working there, including the chair of the ABC, Kim Williams. They promote the Liberal Party and Peter Dutton as often as possible. But despite all of that, Peter Dutton is now telling his supporters not to watch the ABC and labelling them as the hate media. And a few people in our audience have asked us, well, why are you focusing so much on Peter Dutton and calling out all of his errors? Well, David, we're just like everyone else. We like watching the train wreck that's happening. It's all in slow motion, and we just want to see how far down the cliff all of this falls down, because it's really been a sight to behold. But the other thing is that it's never clear how a first-time leader will perform during a campaign. Not even the leader would know this, but Anthony Albanese had the experience of the 2022 election campaign, and it is different when you are the Prime Minister, and Peter Dutton just didn't have that experience of a leader's campaign. But I just also feel that he never gave himself the best chance possible. Now, That might be because of the leader themselves. It might be because of the campaign team. It might be a combination of the two. It might be all of the above, whatever. But it's almost like the Liberal Party just hasn't given themselves the best chance of winning this election campaign, and poor media management, I think, has been one of those reasons.
Yeah, the media management has been appalling, really. And I know that, how do I put this nicely? I know that it's probably a challenge with somebody who's less appealing to the general public, like Peter Dutton is. He was the third choice of the party, really. He was outsmarted by Scott Morrison in terms of the leadership challenge against Malcolm Turnbull. Being outsmarted by Scott Morrison, I probably don't even need to give a metaphor as to what it's like, because it's good enough. You know, it'd be like losing a spelling competition to Donald Trump, and walked right into the trap that everybody could see happening.
But even still, whichever leader you've got, whether they're a good or a poor leader, you still got to present them in the best way possible, and they just haven't done this.
And as I said, a Prime Minister doesn't have to be... Prime Minister needs to be one of three things, preferably the three of them or even the two of them. Either a good communicator or a good administrator, and by that I mean being able to formulate good policy and lead the government in letting this in, or a good people person, and in terms of being able to keep the numbers up and work with his or her colleagues to make sure that they're doing the best. There's other things you need to be as a Prime Minister, but those to me seem to be where the 3 points are most important, at least from a public perception. You need to be able to be a good leader, which I don't think Dutton is anyway. I don't get the sense that he could get many people outside the party marching behind him, for example. I don't think he's a terribly empathetic person, which, again, Turnbull could be empathetic, or at least come across that way. And again, this is not an endorsement of Malcolm Turnbull in any way, shape or form, but Tony Abbott had a weird kind of empathy too. Like, it wasn't what you'd expect. Tony Abbott was able to at least pretend that he cared about people he was talking to. Scott Morrison couldn't. And really, Dutton is hopefully the last of the line of Liberal Party leaders that started with Howard, went through a whole range, ended with Abbott to Turnbull to Morrison to Dutton. Now, for some of you out there, Turnbull was a bit of an up bump, that's fine. But he had this extremely feral party that nobody, I'll be fair, nobody could control. So in that sense, he was a decline because the feral party just went after him.
Oh, and also, it's almost like it's not a theory of evolution, it's a theory of devolution.
Yeah. Once Morrison was elected, it should have been game over then. They should have packed it up, stripped the whole party down and started again. But no, they said, no, we've got someone worse. And now they're talking Angus Taylor. So who knows how low they can go.
The final opinion polls are in, and they're all suggesting that the Labor Party will win the election either in minority or majority government, and that there's not much chance for the Liberal National Coalition to be able to do either of these. And all of the polls, and that's the Resolve poll, Morgan, Essential, News poll, YouGov and Demos, they're fluctuating between 52 to 48% and 53 to 47% in the two-party preferred vote. And there hasn't been much of a change during this week, but even still, the ghosts of the 2019 election have been brought out, and many people have pointed out that the opinion polling for the 2019 campaign was completely wrong, and that's where Bill Shorten was widely expected to win that election, but Scott Morrison ended up being the winner. Here's what we predicted back in 2019. My feeling is that Labor should win this, and they should be quite confident about maybe picking up around 15 seats. Now, no one wants to have egg on their face, as we found in 1999, 2001, 2004, 2015. I mentioned all of those state examples where surprise victories just came out of nowhere, and that's what a surprise is. It comes out of nowhere. But there's just very little to suggest that there's something that might pop out of the box at the last minute and create some surprises.
I actually think that we might be looking at another term Liberal National, to be quite honest. And I think it's going to happen through preferences. I think Labor's going to win the primary vote, but I think in those marginal seats where people will vote for independents, the preference flows will go to LNP.
So just a little bit of self-humiliation for me there, David. I got it completely wrong. You got it completely right. So congratulations to you back in 2019. But it could end up being the same situation for 2025. Now, I'm trying to cover my ass here a little bit, but opinion polls, even if they are this close to the election, they are not the real thing. They can still be wrong, but there's a wide range of reasons why they're unlikely to be wrong in 2025. And I don't mean that they will predict the exact vote and the seat tally, but just about who's likely to win the election. Now, first of all, as we've said so many times during this campaign, Peter Dutton has run a really, really, really bad election campaign, and Albanese has run a good, competent campaign. And as you mentioned before, David, it hasn't been spectacular, but it's been competent. And if the worst thing that can happen was falling off a stage and then the media rabbiting on about it for 4 weeks, that probably means that he's run a pretty good campaign. The other thing is that pollsters have also reassessed their methodology since 2019, so they are better at assessing public sentiment than before. And I guess we also have to consider that issue, that it is harder to reach people in 2025 through different technologies, as well as voting patterns becoming more unpredictable. Now, that might be a reason for why the opinion polls could be wrong like they were in 2019, but could all of them be wrong again? And could they be all wrong again by even a bigger margin? I just don't think it's very likely this time around.
I think it's fair to say that the 2019 election polls were still within the margin of error, but they miscalculated where that margin of error laid, if that makes sense. So, yeah, they were wrong, but they weren't as hideously wrong as some of the pundits who'd been caught by them thought. Morrison won a lot of seats, but he didn't win by that much, and it went into vote distributions and things like that.
He didn't win by much, but he still won that election.
But he won the election, absolutely. So, yeah, 2019, and you're right, the pollsters, having miscalculated where the error would lay, have got a lot better. I don't think they've called an election wrong in the aggregate anyway since then, which isn't to say it won't happen again. They are only human. It's in their business model interests, or it's in their business interests to be right. News Poll is not owned by News Corp precisely, and it's certainly not used as a vehicle, even though it leans to the right in its questions and how it tries to shape things. It still has to be fairly accurate. It still has to work out. Otherwise, people stop listening. What is it? The advance poll, where it's always shows Dutton 25 points ahead. It's this total outlier, and it's probably being funded by right-wing organisations for that business model. But most polls need to be accurate because they do other things too, like they do commercial
chocolate biscuits.
Yeah, what's your favourite chocolate biscuit? And millions of dollars in advertising and production is tied up in this, so they have to get it right. The political party stuff they run at a loss at, really, but it's to show how accurate they are. So when you think, well, I've got a product, is my chocolate biscuit better than the Djokovic chocolate biscuit? Let's ring 2,000 people and ask them. The results don't matter in a sense, but they matter in that if they get that wrong, if it turns out the Lewis chocolate biscuit, 1,100 people of the 2,000 liked it, but it turns out that in fact the Djokovic chocolate biscuit is much better or much more popular, they've done their business. So,
well, I do have a good chocolate biscuit recipe, which I'll share with you one day.
See, I don't. So you're one up on me. But my point is that we tend to be very or we as a population tend to be very scornful about polls. But they're actually, all of them work very hard to be as accurate as they possibly can be.
And especially this close to the election day as well. But even still, I just think that there's, based on all the opinion polls that we've seen over the past 2 months, there's just a lot of moving parts that need to fall into the place for the Liberal Party, considering that we've got that moving vote where around 500,000 people are actually voting every day and have done so during the pre-polling period. I think that number has actually gone up quite a bit. And then there's the big vote on election day itself. And just comparing that opinion polling in 2019, which everyone is talking about, the ghost of the 2019 election. And that is the thing that both parties are referring to. The Labor Party is warning its supporters not to be complacent because they expected to win in 2019 but lost. And the Liberal Party keeps pointing to the miracle victory by Scott Morrison and that it's not over until it's over. And that's absolutely correct. It is not over until it is all over, until every single vote has been counted on election night. So that's one issue, but there's other things that we have to look at in those opinion polls from 2019. And I guess if the opinion polls got it wrong with the two-party preferred vote at that election, we just have to assume that they got it wrong with personal ratings as well, but we'll give it a go anyway. The personal rating contest is very similar between 2019 and 2025. Anthony Albanese has got the same personal rating as Scott Morrison did in 2019, and that was +1. Peter Dutton has actually got a worse rating than Bill Shorten did in 2019. His current rating is -24, whereas Bill Shorten's was -8. And the other point is that the electorate has never voted a leader as unlikable as Peter Dutton in the opinion polls. And I'm sorry if this is mixed up and a little bit confusing, but if Peter Dutton is to replicate that miracle victory from 2019, he has to be in the position that Anthony Albanese is currently in, but he's not. He's actually in a worse position than Bill Shorten was in that 2019 election, and he's also trying to win from opposition and not from government. So there's just a lot of factors that are not in his favour as far as the opinion polls are concerned.
The margin of error, the polls are wider than that too. It was always going to be a next to impossible call to win from a one-term government. Australians tend to give the government another go. Now, that's not a guarantee, of course. 1931 election saw the ejection of a one-term government, with the Scullin Labor government being hammered out of office in one of the worst defeats for the Labor Party of all time. Most prime ministers get a second go. Again, it's not a guarantee, but Peter Dutton had to fight that historical tendency. He also had to fight all those issues that we've been talking about, and his general unpopularity and mistrust by the public. Anthony Albanese has had a past. We're aware of pretty much everything he's done. He's spent a long time in Parliament, in public, and it was very hard to find any dirt. Peter Dutton has rumours about his circumstances of leaving the Queensland Police Force. He has rumours circulating his impropriety in business. Now, none of these may be true. I'll be really fair. I'm inclined to think that most of them aren't true, and I certainly hope most of them or all of them aren't true. But it's perception in politics. You get the anti-Albanese people claiming all kinds of stuff, but it tends to be ridiculous nonsense that is easily seen to be not true. I'm not speaking as a Albo fanboy here. I'm just looking at it from the point of view of a voter who, which way do I go? Do I go with the person who has some unanswered questions about their past, or do I go with the slick politician, career politician, who I may not agree with, but who has run a scandal-free? No ministers have resigned in disgrace. There's been no major leaks. It's been a very tight team, despite the fact that it is clear that some members do not like other members in the cabinet. Yeah, the Liberal Party is leaking to the Labor Party because they don't like Peter Dutton that much. And these are, I think, considerations that the vaguely interested are in. For the non-interested who are, here we go, another vote, 18 months. I only voted 18 months ago. I've got to go back down. I hate all politicians. The general vibe is that Peter Dutton is not the type of man you would trust.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
And this is the most important part of today's episode of New Politics, our predictions of the election result and the reasons why. And just to string it along a little bit further, we'll give a summary of all the reasons and then our final predictions. And my feeling is that Anthony Albanese has done what we'd expect from a first-term government that's only been in office for 3 years. They've got the experience of being in government. They can talk about all the things that they've done, rightly or wrongly, but at least they can talk about the tangible things. Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party cannot do that. It's hypothetical. They can only talk about things that might happen in the future under an LNP government or refer to the things when they were last in office, which wasn't such a great period. And of course, they can attack the current government. That's what they've been doing. But the main point is that Peter Dutton and the Liberal National Coalition have run a really terrible campaign, and they haven't offered any great reasons for why the electorate should vote the Labor Party out or the Labor government out. It's been a highly negative campaign, but to run a negative campaign, you just have to be really, really good at it. And while the Labor government has had some first-term problems, they had that disaster of the National Anti-Corruption Commission playing politics on housing with the Australian Greens and not doing very much on building more public housing. The failure to call out the genocide against Palestine is a big stain, and I can accept that that's not a big issue for most people in the electorate and it's not front and centre, but for me that's a big moral stain on this government. But overall, and especially when you compare with the first term of the Abbott government or the Turnbull government or the Morrison government, they've been a good, stable government.
They don't deserve to win for some of those reasons, but they certainly deserve to retain government, if that makes sense, in terms of they've made some terrible mistakes and they're going to be judged harshly by history, I think. But compared to the Liberal Party, they've raised their head a little bit higher above the line, and it's hard to see how the coalition can gain the 21 seats or 22 seats required for victory, or the 17 to 18 seats for a minority government.
Well, the other point is that the Liberal Party finally released their policy costings on the second last day of the campaign, and there just wasn't really enough time for anyone to assess the veracity of their claims or, you know, whatever the case was. They just made the claim that everything would be materially better under their budget, whatever that means, and they'd also have a budget that's $10 billion better off and $40 billion lower than Labor's $150 billion budget deficits over the next 4 years. And is it any better than what's being proposed by the Labor Party? Well, I just don't know, David, because it's been released so late in the campaign that I just haven't had the time to assess it. And this is the problem with releasing this sort of stuff so late in the campaign. The electorate hasn't got enough time to digest the key points. And sure, they're not going to go for the little bits and pieces within what they've announced, but there just isn't enough time to digest the key points of what they're trying to say. And, you know, they're not going to get the detailed analysis of this anyway, but there just is not enough time for whatever the Liberal Party was trying to push to get any resistance or traction on this. So they just didn't put in the effort to get all of this prepared earlier, but they did have the time to go to their 15th petrol bowser during the week to talk about their petrol egg size reduction. And that was like the big push that they were making in this final week. And the point is that the price of petrol is not such a big issue at the moment. In May 2022, at the point of the last election campaign, the average petrol price across Australia was $2.12 per litre, and the average price is now $1.79 per litre, and that's a 16% reduction. And of course, everyone would like to see petrol prices come down even further, but it's not the hot button issue that it was 3 years ago. So all the time in the world for these political stunts, but not enough time to prepare proper policy costings. And I'd suggest that they'll probably have a lot more time to prepare these costings after the election. The other thing is that, you know, when you look at all of these different things, Peter Dutton just hasn't had any luck during this campaign, but you have to make your own luck during a campaign. And if you don't have that luck, or if things are not falling your way, you just have to be as prepared as possible. And the Liberal Party just hasn't been prepared. And We are making predictions today, or we will be making predictions at the end of the episode, but we were wrong in one big prediction, and that was that we predicted that Peter Dutton wouldn't be the leader at this election. We were totally wrong about that, and I bet that the Liberal Party did wish that they did have a different leader at this election. Now, they do have those rules in place, so they can't force a spill or force a challenge to remove a leader. I don't know who else they could have put in, but they probably would have run a better campaign than Peter Dutton has.
It's hard to see how they couldn't. Even somebody as hideously compromised as Angus Taylor is in terms of his dealings with water. Taylor is young, he's energetic. You could argue he comes across well. He is the best, but his best is a very relative term.
Well, it's not so much about who else they could have put in, but I guess the thing was that we predicted that Peter Dutton, I think we predicted it quite a few times during this parliamentary term, that Peter Dutton would not be the leader at the next election, but he survived. And I guess the campaign that he ran with the voice to Parliament, that boosted his political stocks in some sense and gave the Liberal Party a false sense of security about Peter Dutton being able to win the next election.
For sure. And yet, as I said at the time, it probably killed his political career because he poured everything into it. And once it came out that the voice wasn't going to be what he said it was, and that he basically lied to the public about it, even if he didn't say those direct lies, he was the face of the no vote, whether he wanted it or not. He was done as a political candidate. It shows that the party couldn't replace him. There was just nobody. I know I just spoke about Angus Taylor, but Angus Taylor was the best of the worst lot. And, they're talking Andrew Hastie, which is extreme desperation given that Hastie isn't terribly experienced and is far, far right-wing, well, as far right as the Liberal Party goes, and doesn't really represent Australia outside of his electorate. So Peter Dutton, I think, needs some credit for holding on to a job that he had very little chance of holding on to. But his luck held out there. Unfortunately, it was all of his luck, because when it came to the election campaign, he had the cyclone that he completely mishandled by not staying in Queensland. He had the death of the Pope. He had the misfortune to do too many debates, which showed his weakness amongst those people who watched the debates. He just hasn't excelled in any way that is vital for a political leader to have done. And he hasn't made the case. Before the campaign, I thought he might be able to get 8 seats or maybe 10 seats if he did really well, because he's got the soft media as well. And even with the soft media, it's possible that they're going to come out with a net loss of seats, which they can't afford.
Now, audiences been saying, well, what about everyone else? All the other people that are running in this election? And we've been mainly talking about who will win the election, but there's a lot of other players who will decide who forms government if there is a minority government. And there's a wide range of independents who are running again. And I think most of the community independents will hold on to their seats. And usually first-term independents who do have the benefit of incumbency go on to win a second term. And the only independents who I don't think will win are those who resign from the Liberal and National parties to sit on the crossbench. And that's the seat of Monash in Victoria and Calare in New South Wales. I suspect that they'll return to the Liberal and National parties respectively. And it's hard to see any of the Teal community independents losing their seats. And Liberal voters who switched to the Teal independents in 2022 and some of those before that, because of Scott Morrison, are hardly going to shift back to the Liberal Party because of Peter Dutton, who was even more regressive. Now, there might be 1 or 2 of those community independent seats that go back. I don't think it's likely, but it's hard to know which ones that would be. And Nicolette Buller is likely to win the seat of Bradfield off the Liberal Party. And the candidate backed by Climate 200 in Fremantle, Kate Hewlett, she's got a little bit of a chance, and that seat is currently held by the Labor Party. So the number of independents could increase in this election. I think it's currently sitting at 18, so it could go to 19 or 20 seats, and that includes the Australian Greens. And there's also a possibility that the Australian Greens could replicate their performance from the Queensland state election. That's where they held their primary vote, but actually lost a couple of seats. The Greens have increased their vote in the federal election campaign according to opinion polls, and that would be good, but there's no point to that if you lose seats. And they might pick up seats in Melbourne. There's one or two that are a strong possibility in Wills and McNamara, and both of those seats are held by the Labor Party at the moment. And of course, if it's a majority government, the final number of crossbenchers won't be as significant as it could have been, but it's still likely to be a large crossbench after this election.
Even if Labor gets a majority, which seems the likely, we're still going to have a lot of crossbenchers, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think the electorate is ready for representation rather than just another party hack. The question of career politicians is vexed because some of the great prime ministers and leaders of parliament have been career politicians. Having said that, there's people in all parties really who are just there to be a vote for the party and not much more, and who don't really look after their electorates terribly well, who turn up to vote and don't start policy, don't start legislation, don't do very much at all. So yeah, I'm hoping that we will see a little bit more of strong local members. And if they're part of the party, fantastic, because there are some very good local members who are proud party members, and they should be encouraged. I think this election could be crucial in the future in that it starts to see the further turn towards, or the further turn away from, the status quo of a couple of major parties and then minor parties on the edge and independents on the edge. I think we're seeing minor parties and independents move closer to the centre of things and maybe even onto the Treasury benches.
We've also been asked if there's a pathway to victory for the coalition, and the short answer is no. But if there is, it's a path that's even more precarious or perilous than the path for Jason and the Argonauts trying to enter the Black Sea. The Liberal Party MP, Paul Fletcher, he was very confident in a victory. Here's what he had to say, speaking during the week.
The coalition's going to win because people know that they are worse off now than they were 3 years ago, with real incomes down about 8%, and practical measures like low and middle income tax benefit of up to $1,200.
Okay, so in majority?
Yes, I think we will win a majority. I think we can absolutely get a majority, and we're fighting every day over the remaining 5 days to get that outcome.
And he's so confident of winning that he's decided to retire from politics. And generally, MPs don't have a habit of retiring from politics when their party is on the cusp of victory. So I guess Paul Fletcher is just saying what he's got to say. Could One Nation preferences come into play? They are polling anywhere between 7 to 10% of the vote. Those preferences might affect the final results. The expected high level of voting for smaller parties and independent candidates, that's probably around 35% of the overall vote. It could actually even be higher than that. That could have an influence, and that's what makes the final result unpredictable. There's also the possible protest vote against the Labor government in outer capital city suburbs. We spoke about that last week, I think it was. That could possibly have an effect. Will there be any surprises? Well, yes, there will, but we just don't know where. If we did know where these surprises were happening, they wouldn't be a surprise. But for me, the biggest surprise will be if the Liberal Party gets into a position of minority government, or even if it wins the election. But I just don't think there's any chance of happening that, because absolutely nothing suggests that either of those two options will happen. So, David, I'm predicting a Labor win on this election. I'm veering more towards a majority win at the moment just because of what's been happening during the week. I'd actually prefer it if it was a minority government, because they're always a lot more interesting and a lot more fun. So it's either a majority or a minority win for the Labor Party and an election loss for the Liberal and National parties. It's just hard to see any other result happening on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think it will be a Labor majority too. Whether that's a deserved majority or not for another podcast. I won't be surprised if it turns into a minority government. But I think given how the polling is going, how the campaigns have gone, what the policies are, that Labor will maintain their current position. It's not out of the realms of possibility that they will gain a seat or two. But I think we will end up with a very similar parliament to what we are now, with maybe a few less Liberal members. I think, too, the National Party will maintain its 13 seats or whatever it's got. One of the great consistencies of the Australian Parliament is that the National Party always get between 10 and 15 seats. And I know that Greens members and supporters think that this is unfair, and it kind of is, but Greens membership and support is spread right throughout the country. National Party support is very much on the southeastern part of things, so they've got an advantage in terms of being able to cluster around seats. Having said that, there's all kinds of little surprises. I saw a satirical newspaper asking Nation watches Queensland to see what weird results it's going to pull out of its bottom, and it's funny because it's true. Queensland could go anyway. So while I think, looking at all the numbers, looking at the aggregate of polls, looking at the campaigns, looking at the policies, it will be a Labor government and a majority Labor government. I'm hedging a little bit and saying a minority Labor government won't surprise me.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.